or Herman Cain or a Candace Owens or even sometimes a Kanye West. Like these people are really important, right? Because, oh, well, look, you know, you thought that all Republicans were white. Well, look at that. We've got a black woman. We've got a flamboyant gay man, right? These figures are important because they break the mold, because they break the stereotype what you'd expect people to look at, right? It's so weird because, like, on one end, we know this because leftists will turn around and argue like, hey, representation media is important because people like people that look like them. That's just how we identify. We like people that look like us or act like us or are like us or same racial makeup, religion. We know this. But then on the other end, they'll turn around and be like, it doesn't matter what all of our people look like. People should be able to look past that and go for the ideas. Like that's, it's a really like empty, hollow, dumb argument. I don't know.
If that's the case. All of this makes a lot more sense when we look at where Xanderhal is getting this whole narrative from. In his video, he starts off by citing another YouTuber whose video's thesis forms the basis of his own, and the channel he cites just so happens to be an actual reactionary YouTuber whose primary content focus is dunking on e-girls and defending Leafy.
Oh my god.
So what's going on there? This all reminds me of last year when he wouldn't stop saying ableist slurs despite his community's objections to him doing so. His reasoning was that gamer language such as this is more effective at bringing people over from the right. It only took about 12 debates and 7 response videos for him to eventually stop.
Hyperbole, strike 7.
He did stop, and that's good, but not without it requiring severe pushback from multiple different creators. Xanderhal does—
Wait, why is this even a bad— why would you even cite this as a bad thing? Like, this is an example of him doing something that, like, upon further reflection, he stopped. Watch this, watch this. Fuck, never mind. Like, if he changed his opinion, who cares? Like, what? Well, I mean, like, I guess not necessarily cares, but like,
say that optics aren't everything and that it's okay to be trans or something.
Trans people with pink hair, but I'm more so talking about the attitude, not like the optics of who's advocating for what, right? That doesn't matter. I don't believe in the idea that like we should relegate certain identities to the sidelines because their identities are like bad optics. I don't believe in that. Okay, optics are important, but they're not everything, right?
But that was only after the Gamergate tirade spilling out of him.
Condescending,
Woke,
trans people with pink hair.
So it's stuff like this that makes me wonder about the boundaries of what these communities are able to accomplish, and whether or not the high regard debate lords seem to hold themselves in is warranted. But you can decide that for yourself. See the current state of the valiant white debate lord saviors of the American online left.
Stop it.
He'll probably complain about being clipped out of context, but I mean, the full video's there. It's a full video. You can watch the whole thing. Also, if you do go there, don't say anything mean, please. Just comment Squid Gang with 6 G's. But that's all I really needed to say about that guy. I want to move on to a more serious example of where I feel that these spaces are causing harm within the online left. I think it actually makes the most sense to start this story by briefly going back to Xanderhal reacting to something that I tweeted.
This is the one that instantly, if anyone says Vaush is wrong in the Professor Flowers debate,
there needs to be like some, I don't know, maybe it's just that Destiny has a different sense of humor. It might just be that simple, but you can see it in his face. He like, he wants to stop watching so bad. There needs to, I don't know, there needs to be a better way to communicate this shit with each other.
Okay? There's no saving them. They're a piece of shit, okay? Because they're defending genocide. There's just, that is the dichotomy in that debate. You're either anti-genocide or pro-woke genocide. You're either pro-genocide or anti-genocide. And certain people on the left are pro-genocide because it looks
throwing woke in there is pretty dumb.
So if you have no idea what any of that meant, let me get you up to speed. The tweet he is referencing is talking about a conflict from a couple of months ago that happened between the large left-leaning streamer Vaush and a small leftist video essayist, Professor Flowers. My tweet is saying that Vaush was in the wrong in that conflict. This interaction began when Professor Flowers made a video critiquing Vaush for conflating black nationalism with white nationalism in a prior debate. Vaush reacted to this video on his stream. He disagreed with her characterizations of him. Professor Flowers made a video responding to his disagreements. He reacted to that video on his stream and disagreed. He then invited her on the stream to discuss, which ended up turning into a debate. After this, she released one final video on it, and so did he. That's not where this ends, but for now, that summary should suffice. The debate was, well, a shit show, as both parties have since acknowledged, and as we'll get into in a moment. But the effects that it had on the online left content space were much more serious and malicious. One of these effects, as Xanderhal has so succinctly put it in his video, is that it's treated as orthodox thought in debate spaces that anyone who agrees with or defends Professor Flowers in any capacity is pro-genocide or sympathetic to violent ethno-states.
That is the dichotomy in that debate. You're either anti-genocide or pro-woke genocide.
Now, this idea comes it comes straight from the source, actually, from the
Destiny
overlord of the debate realm himself, Vaush. Since this debate nearly 6 months ago, Vaush has continued to characterize Professor Flowers as being an anti-white racist whose ideology inevitably leads to genocide. Here he is talking about it last week on his stream.
It's like Professor Flowers. I think that Professor Flowers is basically just an anti-white racist who stumbled into a misunderstanding of decolonial terminology. There are always bad people who will mask their ideology through sort of euphemism and adjacent positions. How many super far-right fasci types throw their positions in the front of like nationalism, not like hyper-nationalist, fascist, whatever, you know, but just like regular American.
The fuck out of here, Gabe! You know who the fuck I am?
It's not even like anything.
I'm so sorry, guys. I gotta hold on. I just have to redo this whole section. I was not listening. Hold on. I'm sorry. Hold on. Just.
Did you know that you can make a full-time income from YouTube without ever trying to grow your own channel?
God, I hate those
I'm so
ads
sorry,
with a
August.
burning passion.
Our orthodox thought in debate spaces that anyone who agrees with or defends Professor Flowers in any capacity is pro-genocide or sympathetic to violent ethnostates.
That is the dichotomy in that debate. You're either anti-genocide or pro-woke genocide.
Now,
So what? We're gonna get into this more because this is the main content of like the rest of the video, right? But it is important to note that there's a difference between arguing for something where, or like, you need to be honest about the intentions of someone like a Professor Flowers, and regardless of whether or not you think that the logic of what she's saying could be used to like the logic sort of reduces down to a support of genocide. Like, even if you're going to make that argument, right? This is where intention and looking at the way a person generally talks about issues and frames issues, it is relevant, and it's like where we can't just look at the argument in and of itself, right? Because you could what the critique is that Xander Hall is making is and Vaush is that the logic she's using to defend her support of black separatism could be interpreted, or it logically follows from it that genocide against white people is acceptable. But that's if that were the case, of course that's worthy of criticism and that's worth discussing. And at bare minimum, that's a conversation that's worth having and understanding, right? As a general rule, I think most people will agree that genocide bad. So we're not going to do that, right? So we can have that conversation. But where it is different and where we on the left can be a little snobby, right, is like, I don't think any person who watches any amount of someone like Professor Flowers' content could really draw from it that she has this underlying motive that she's not willing to admit, that she just wants to kill a bunch of white people, right? This is not fundamentally what's going on, and to frame it in that way is disingenuous, and you're going to create hostility where there doesn't need to be hostility. Like, this is a tense subject for very obvious reasons. There's no need to make it more tense than it needs to be by saying that I'm critiquing your logic. Like, this is how arguments go, right? We critique the logic of people, and we say that certain things follow that we think are bad, and that's why you shouldn't use that logic, right? That's the claim there very specifically is that your logic, without you knowing it or without you realizing it, or maybe without you having thought about it this way, leads to something that I am presuming you would also disagree with, that you also think is bad. The argument is not that the logic leads to white genocide, which, based off of the rest of your conversation, the way you frame your arguments, I think you support. So it is just for the sake of like getting interactions on Twitch or making it oversimplified or something. I don't know what, but to frame that whole interaction and that whole debate as either picking a side between pro or anti-genocide is so intellectually lazy and unfair, and it makes people who are further like the leftist video essayist type not want to have any interest in engaging with you.
Oh, this idea comes from somewhere. It comes straight from the source, actually, from the overlord of the debate realm himself, Vaush. Since this debate nearly 6 months ago, Vaush has continued to characterize Professor Flowers as being an anti-white racist whose ideology inevitably leads to genocide. Here he is talking about it last week on his stream.
It's like Professor Flowers. I think that Professor Flowers is basically just an anti-white racist who stumbled into a misunderstanding of decolonial terminology. There are always bad people who will mask their ideology through sort of euphemism and adjacent positions. How many super far-right fasci types cloak their positions in the front of like nationalism? Not like hyper-nationalist, fascist, whatever, you know, but just like regular American nationalism. That's like the most common thing in the book, you know? It's not even like anything PF said was that extreme either. It's ethnic cleansing. I don't get it.
There's enough lore and content regarding this interaction to last anyone who's interested until next winter. So I'm just going to give my honest opinion and summarize it in the following way. I do not think that anyone that has actually listened to Professor Flowers' videos on this topic can make any of the claims that Vaush and his fans continue to make about her. Calling her an anti-white racist that is pro-genocide or pro-ethnostates is a lie, as it was never the content of her arguments. It was a narrative crafted by the failings of of the format of online debate streaming. More on that later.
We'll come back to this later.
But more importantly, thanks to the means by which this narrative was conceived, with Vaush arguing against decolonization and separatism using fear of retribution rhetoric.
It's all well and good to talk about living free of your oppressors, but when you break apartheid in South Africa, there are millions of white people living in that country. Like, what do? Do you just like ship them all out? Do you build camps? I mean, there's not really any way to do that without genocide, you know?
It has created a hostile space for black creators wanting to discuss issues like black separatism and black nationalism, and this in turn serves to reinforce the racial status quo of LeftTube, which is some
there are so many black people. Believe it or not, there are so many black people out there that aren't black separatists. I would be okay with cutting out all black separatists from like reasonable discussions. Political shit. There's so many black people out there that are okay living in the same world as white people. I don't think we need to pretend that black separatists represent like.
I think that's an unfair representation of what black separatism is, and whatever. And we're gonna get in the same meaningless back and forth, and not the conversation is not going to move forward. So I'm not going to try and get into the conversation about whether or not black separatism means forcing it means being pro living in a world without white people, because first off, it's just not my place, and second off, I'm not sure that I can word that one in such a way that it'll convince anyone, so I'm not going to even try. But let's see, what was the point I wanted to make was the argument that because there's not a lot of people who identify with an ideology, that in and of itself is an argument against the ideology being bad is sort of it's not disingenuous. It's just like not good, right? So when you look at like black separatism and black liberation theory, this mostly exists in like academic circles. That's at least where it stems from. And it's actually not that uncommon within academic circles. I don't think at all, particularly in today's culture of academia, which I know a bunch of conservatives will get all upset about. But it's this thing of like, just because it's maybe not the majority of black Americans who would identify with it, means that it's bad or that we should ostracize it from the conversation is, like, I don't know. It's like people who are working on this from a theory perspective, doing lots of reading, like lots of people in the world of academia, of theory, of thinking about these kind of issues deeply, do hold views that are different from the masses, right? Like that is just our world. Those of us who think about these kinds of topics nonstop, it's not necessarily that we are like fundamentally different and think that everyone is stupid or dumb or doesn't know how to think or whatever. It's just that when you spend lots of time reading, consuming content, however it is that you go about getting up to speed with the discourse in its most in-depth level, you're inevitably going to run into positions which differentiate themselves from the norm in some meaningful way. And this doesn't make them good or bad, but to dismiss them as just being held by a minority of people, it's different in that it's not like fringe in the way you could say that, like, someone who's a genuine white nationalist, like someone who's an active member of the KKK and is proud of it, is, right? Because that exists purely in the world, frankly, of not purely, but mostly in the world of poor white working class America, right? That this is not a thing which exists in the higher ups of the world of intellectual thought and discourse, but it does for black separatism, and I know conservatives will say, "Oh, that's just because it's like it's allowed." It's part of the culture is being like anti-white and anti-white genocide, right? Whatever, and that needs to be rejected, and people do that all the time. But people like Destiny reject the notion of white genocide as being a thing that's happening or a problem to be concerned about. So let's like halt the conversation, listen to these people a little bit, because the thing is, when you listen to their rhetoric outside of this specific aspect of what they're talking about, like it really doesn't sound that radical. I don't know.
A significant viewpoint of like the black community. Just like white separatists probably don't have a good place in some of these conversation spaces either. But
this is where, again, right, this is beginning to get into it. And so I'm going to try and keep this part quick before we get into the meat and potatoes of this whole fucking shit show. By following up a comment on, I think we should remove black separatists from the conversation the same way that we should remove white separatists from the conversation, what you're doing is exactly the thing that they're criticizing you for, and I don't think that you're engaging with it in any sort of deep, meaningful way, which is to say, when you look at the United States as it has been for its entirety and as it is today, right? Systemic structural racism, anti-black racism exists. It's ingrained into the system, into every part of the system in some ways. Some ways it's much more obvious, much more egregious. Some ways it's a little bit more nuanced. Some ways potentially you could even try and argue that it's not there. But on some level, we all agree on the left that it's present at some level, right? And so given that is an accepted fact, given that we all agree upon that anti-black racism exists, is real, that there's a history of oppression, which is which is a required explanation for things when we look at disparities in crime, in access to education, in access to healthcare, in access to fair and equitable policing, in access to this, yada, 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 and on we go, and how segregated the United States still is in regards to where we live, the communities that we live in, where our kids go to school, the everything, right? Given that this reality is what exists, to tell the black community in the United States that they can't, that it's not okay for them to have conversations about blackness as it opposes to whiteness, and how to go about to have conversations within the black community about how to remove themselves from the oppression, how to properly go about this, how to combat the problem that is whiteness, is you are doing the conservative thing of ignoring history and just pretending that we all live in a vacuum where we should just judge each other purely based off of our, the content of our character and not the color of our skin, right? Whatever. Which is like, of course, that is on an individual level, that of course is true. But on a societal level, when we're dealing with systemic and structural problems, you can't do it that way. You never can. You can't, in the same way that when we have a conversation about needs-blind admissions or affirmative action in the context of school settings, right? Like there still might be some disagreement on the left as to how to go about having those conversations. But what we're not doing is saying that we recognize that those conversations are okay to have because of the reality that certain people are just not given the opportunity that wealthy people are, or that white people are, or that men are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, such that we need to have conversations about how to address those problems. And so to tell as a blanket statement to black people that having conversations about how to combat the problem, the fundamental problem of their oppression, and that is whiteness, is insane. And it actually is, I don't know how else to say it, it's maintaining white supremacist, the status quo of white supremacism, of living in a country which is made for, built around, and it is built for a specific group of people, which is white men. That is the reality of it, right? That is how it's always been, and that is how it maintains. And of course, we're beginning to, over time, we have more and more conversations, and we're getting more and more honest about it. But to say to black people as a group that they cannot talk about differentiating themselves from whiteness because it is the it is the whiteness that has been the cause of their historical oppression is I think it's the exact same line of logic that we're willing to criticize Republicans for when it comes to their full-blown, full-stop rejection of systemic racism existing.
Something that, especially as leftists, we should not be wanting to reinforce. In his retrospective video on the conflict, Vaush still fails to meaningfully recognize the distinction between black separatism and white nationalism, which was the main criticism of Professor Flowers' original video.
Black separatism is essentially just the black version of white nationalism. It's just kind
Which
of
is
couched
not.
in this like a different type of victim rhetoric. The end result,
Because there is no history in the United States of oppression against white people. Whiteness is the oppressor. I don't know how to phrase this in a better way, but the oppressing class is whiteness. It is the idea of whiteness. It is the idea of being white that is the oppressor. It is not individual white people all across the board who have bad intentions. It's not to say that each and every single one of us has bad intentions regarding wanting to be racist. We all like, a lot of us, I can't say we all, a lot of us like the idea of not being racist. We agree that it's bad. But to say that that white nationalism, white separatism, white whatever, a group of people talking about the oppression of white people, the genocide of white people, how we need to... This is the reason that this conversation is so problematic, to say the very least, is because of the reality that there is no history of white oppression. And number two, it is white people who have carried out the oppression, right? And it is the dead opposite for black people in the United States. They have been the oppressed class. The concept of blackness has been attacked, targeted, belittled. Like, how many ways do you need to phrase it? They have been the oppressed class. So for them to not be allowed to talk about that reality at the bare minimum, to talk about the fact that the enemy to their freedom, to their being treated as equals, is this ongoing, lingering, like, energy of whiteness in America is insane, and it's belittling, and it is a full-blown rejection of the reality in which they live in, of the country in which they live in. To go out, it plays perfectly into this frustration with like performative white liberal politics, where you go on your social media and you share Black Lives Matter posts and you talk about how being racist is bad and you make fun of Republicans who like say the N-word or whatever, right? And then on the flip side of things, you turn around to black Americans who want to have a conversation about the fact that systemic and structural racism in the United States today is the biggest threat to them living freely and to addressing the entire history of probably the biggest, I don't even think you can say probably, it's just easily the biggest and most egregiously just bad thing that is one of the prime crucial components of the United States of America. What it can be interpreted as is, yeah, it's great. I like being against racism until I have to deal with it. Until I as a white person have to think about it. Until I as a white person who am part of the there's got to be some better word than energy. That's such a bad word. But it's like the thing that is whiteness. Because, of course, it's not real in the sense that, like, whiteness as a race is some meaningful thing. But it's the oppression that's real. And so when those two things get combined, again, not white people, but whiteness and the oppressors, the oppressing class and the oppressing ideology, they are one. Like they are the same thing. And so when you're telling black separatists that you are the same thing as the people who have as the thing that has been oppressing you, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. This is one of those things, like, I don't know how you could possibly expect them to react in a, a smile and, maybe we just kind of disagree a little bit. Like, I don't know, man.
Tends to lead to ethnicity.
It is the responsibility of of the three people who are currently on the screen right now. Like, of course, not just the three of us, but we as white liberals don't really spend any time ever thinking about how we could possibly be contributing to the problem of systemic and structural racism. We don't. We've told ourselves from a very young age that all we have to do is just not say the N-word and, like, vote Democrat. That's been what we believe that's how we combat this problem. We got to do a lot more thinking than that. And we got to be open to being challenged in more ways than that. We've got to be open to being told that there are ways, without realizing it, that we are playing into the problem, that we are not thinking about something in the right way, that we are not framing something in the right way, that our expectations of how society treats us are inherently racialized. Yeah, so that's that's
ethnic
the point.
Supremacy and ethnostate.
This is one where it's
Vaush is using really old talking points that even white supremacists today don't argue about. I could be wrong because these people are fucking insane. So my understanding might be bad. But my understanding between like I think what a black supremacist would say is that so much of the Western world, fuck you, Gabe. I can never hit him. So much of the Western world is kind of like, would you say embroiled in or consumed by, I guess, like white supremacist ideology. That can be anything from obvious things like the criminal justice system to unobvious things like the education system. That at some point you have to acknowledge that maybe it's unreasonable to expect black people to try to integrate healthily with a system, but rather it's time to leave that system and then have one on your own, rather than trying to work so hard to build something within a white supremacist power structure. Fuck. Oh, I hit him once. It's better to just create a new black power structure, basically. Twice. Oh, shit. What is that? Oh, crossbow. But you're dead, dude. Sorry. That would be like the black supremacist argument. Not necessarily one of... Oh, it's a Yi boy. Shit. I'm sorry, fellow Yi. Hold on. Gabe, how many 5.56 bullets are you going to waste shooting? Is that guy going to try to shoot me after I picked him up? He wouldn't do that, right? Fuck, I don't know who's safe out here. I should just be killing everybody. Sorry. Anyway, a black separatist is not necessarily the same thing, or is not the same thing as a black supremacist. Black separatism doesn't imply black supremacy, or it shouldn't. Whew, Jesus. Okay.
Bad no matter what.
Mind you, this is after like half a year of this being explained to him in varying degrees of simplicity, that this comparison between these two different things serves to ignore the historical context of these movements, and comparing it to Nazism is ignorant, to put it lightly. Gary, anything you want to say here, or can I just keep going?
Okay, well, I guess on the debate side, we did find Professor Flowers guilty of a few crimes.
Okay.
First off, racial essentialization.
What the fuck is that?
It's when you call white people colonizers. It's racist dog whistling.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
This should be disqualifying from the entire left. The idea that literally just admitting, by colonizer, I'm using it as a dog whistle for white.
Okay, give me the timestamp where she said it was okay to call white people colonizers.
What?
You don't have it, do you?
Not on hand.
Okay, well, no one does because it doesn't exist.
But she said white people are colonizers. How is this not an endorsement of...
Who colonized the world, Gary?
Europeans.
Okay, and what did Europeans look like?
Like you.
So, white, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's okay to call white people colonizers. That's racist, hurts our movement, and pushes away potential new leftists.
Gary, I already explained this. That's not what Professor Flowers was saying. Her point was that colonization is an ongoing process, and choosing to ignore this fact makes it impossible for us to truly reconcile with its legacy. Anyone with a baseline understanding of these issues that saw the debate understood that this was the perspective she was coming from, and that Vaush trying to frame this as somehow being racist against white people was, to use an Among Us term, sus.
Why is the context of oppression irrelevant? Why is the context of who has power irrelevant?
Because, and I'll say it once more, and this is why you should really check your racism, my friend. White people and colonizers aren't the same group.
I can't imagine saying that.
People who are white in South Africa are regular humans who live their lives. They are not
colonization is still happening. America.
I don't think I would
yes,
say that to like an alt-righter who I was debating. What like a not helpful
minorities in the country.
to say to anyone.
You're taking a sociological problem.
Oh shit, Vaush. I don't know. Wait, is he calling white people an ethnic minority in South Africa?
Yes, which first off, as Destiny's about to explain, is stupid. But also, here's the other thing that he's doing there is he's looking for like the one example, right? Looking for the one example around the world where you can talk about white people being in the minority, like population-wise, right? And so the problem here is he's equating what Professor Flowers or people talking about this issue in the context of particularly the United States, as if it is specific to the concept of whiteness, right? It's not about white people. This is not some version of the KKK where they fucking hate black people just because they look different. It is directly, explicitly because of the dynamic of oppressing class to the oppressed. And so when they talk about whiteness, it's in that context. It has nothing to do with the fact that we fucking look white.
That's a pretty big yikesy one. So hold on. Okay. For everybody that wants to spam really quickly because you're trying to show off knowledge of demographics or whatever, when we talk about like minority or majority, we're not talking about population size. Otherwise, we would never say that women are minorities, right? When you're talking about minority or majority, typically you're talking about structures of power.
Yep.
In a South Africa that's been out of apartheid for not even, like 3 decades, to say that like, oh, well, white people are an ethnic minority, like it's technically true, but in terms of power, not really. People say women are minorities. Welcome to the conversation, my dude. You're saved this time from your dumb fucking comment. But who says women are minorities? Wait, I can't tell if we're being serious or not. Why not say marginalized? You can say marginalized if you want. I'm just saying that to call white people minorities in South Africa is just, it conveys probably a political reality that's not necessary.
To argue over the difference here, right, is just because people don't want to deal with the actual fundamental problem. It's like, call them minorities or marginalized, whatever. Like,
Fairly true.
Don't get lost in the definitions
in terms of
here.
Overall wealth, in terms of like history, it just sounds a little bit strange. But
and making it a race problem, which is, by the way, what conservatives do to black people.
In this debate, Vaush employed the argument of the fear of retribution because, as members of the gamer zone tend to do, he was testing the limits of her moral framework using an extreme hypothetical, which is a very normal thing to do. It's one of the most normal things you can do, actually.
So you're saying that hypotheticals have no value? What, are you too stupid to understand how they work? The ability to imagine made-up scenarios and argue about them is what distinguishes sentient life from animal.
Shut up, dude. No, I don't have a problem with hypotheticals as a concept. I do, however, have a problem with people being framed as endorsing the extreme outcomes of these hypotheticals.
It's not even like anything PF said was that extreme either. It's ethnic cleansing.
So the entire problem with what Noah's about to say can be summarized in this way, right? In the context of the modern United States, right? We have at least like made it far enough where it's not explicitly cool for Tucker Carlson or Republicans to like say to use racialized, like to use racist. To use blatantly racist language, right? Like they can't just say things that I'm not going to repeat, but you can imagine what I'm saying, right? Like shit that used to be said towards black people that doesn't get said anymore because they know that being racist is like not cool, that it doesn't play well, whatever, right? So they don't use that language. But the entire critique of from the left against conservatives, right, is that it doesn't matter whether or not you're using the right language. Let's look at where the things you say logically follow. And what logically follows from the things you say is racism. So to use that, to defend someone, if Vaush is criticizing someone for what logically follows from the arguments that they're presenting, and your response is to say, well, that doesn't really matter because that's not what she was saying initially.
Argued for them in the first place had they not been brought to the table by Vaush or whichever debate lord they are encountering. In multiple conversations since, Vaush has attributed this escalation in rhetoric to Professor Flowers. Escalations like equating land back to genocide. Here he is talking with indigenous activist Morgan Khashoggi about land back. Morgan and Vaush are referencing Professor Flowers in this clip.
It feels like a very virtue signaling thing sometimes to be very in favor of decolonization. Like, pro land back. But then when it actually comes to talking about these issues and actually like reconciling, like sometimes it can get, I think, a little bit, well, there's a clear dissonance. So
it's
not that people are getting it so wrong. It's just we need to smooth some wrinkles out so that people don't start using really inflammatory language to describe how we feel about our own problems.
The weird part is that Professor Flowers never spoke on these issues on the terms of genocide until she spoke with Vaush, which should be of no surprise to anyone familiar with Debate Bros. Over the course of all these interactions, the first time the word genocide is ever used is here at 4 minutes and 45 seconds into their debate, and it's not mentioned by Professor Flowers.
When you take a look at a lot of black separatist communities,
which once again, right, like Tucker doesn't use the phrase.
Like anti-Semitism.
Maybe he does.
It seems
actually.
like the fundamental bones are pretty similar.
I don't think
you get
he
into
does.
the logistics of creating an
Most
ethnostate,
Republicans
really
don't use the phrase white genocide.
Like take South Africa,
but
right?
we all
I mean, it's all well and good to talk about living free of their oppressors, but when you break apartheid in South Africa, there are millions of white people living in that country.
I don't think that's the
way
way
to
to attack
do you just like
point.
ship them all out? Do you build camps? I mean, it seems like this logic always leads down a really bad road.
Isolate that last quote. It seems like this logic always leads down a really bad road.
Which is
that
a fine
conception
criticism.
right there, that limit testing ideology, is precisely what causes the inflammatory language to start being used in these conversations. The same language that the actual land-backed activists said was causing so many problems.
Using really inflammatory language to describe how we feel about our own problems.
There's not really any way to do that without genocide, you know?
Discussing ideas in this manner, by pulling them to the extremes in a combative context, is especially damaging with topics like black separatism, a topic that the white online left has repeatedly demonstrating having very little knowledge about, and thanks to Vaush and others, very little willingness to inquire further. Vaush just says they're Nazis in reverse, and everyone's like, okay, cool.
Black separatism is essentially just the black version of white nationalism.
All of this has been explained ad nauseum in these videos, but the YouTuber Carr, he has a great channel by the way, go check him out. He explains why this is ignorant as clearly as I've seen anyone do in this clip from Professor Flowers' last video. Let's see if people will get it this time. 147th time's the charm.
I'd like to set the record straight on black separatism because a lot of people seem to get it wrong in online spaces. The best way, I think, to visualize it for anyone listening, separatism is basically self-determination and creating as much space away from your oppressors as possible, allowing you to act upon that self-determination. If that creating space from oppressors requires violence, then it requires violence. It doesn't have to, though. You can talk about Rosewood, Tulsa. You can talk about MOVE in Philadelphia. MOVE was a black separatist movement, and the cops bombed it, and they killed 8 children, and they burnt down a block of townhomes. So this organization was not responsible for anyone being hurt in their town whatsoever. They literally just wanted to do what they saw, mind you, white people doing throughout the country, building compounds and building their own internal insular support networks and dual power structures. That's ultimately what separatism is about, is creating that space between the oppressors and the oppressed or plundered people so that they can act upon that self-determination. It's never been about ethnic cleansing. It's been about creating a safe distance.
It's ethnic cleansing. I don't get it.
We saw the same problem with hypotheticals arise in Vaush's recent debate with YouTuber Non-Compete, where he opposed this hypothetical regarding Jews being overrepresented in banking during the Weimar Republic.
Whenever people have been enslaved...
So I want to say something real quick. In the white liberal, whatever, debate sphere, something they get really turned off by, and immediately you can see them get really frustrated by, and it's almost like a want to disengage immediately, is when someone says something along the lines of freedom from your oppressors could at times require violence. It doesn't have to. It's not. Most times we probably don't want it to, but it might require violence. And people go, oh, white genocide. Now you're giving justification for killing white people, and this is just racism, but backwards or whatever, right? So here's the question, right? Was the American Revolution justified? That was violent. That was violence against our oppressors because we felt like we had no other option. Was that justified? Right? That's the point. Is that there are times when, given the nature of the circumstances and the inability to have any sort of actual dialogue because of how how incredibly ingrained the systems of oppression are into the system, the oppressed class can at times, yes, it's possible that they can overreact and maybe be violent when they don't need to be. But acting like that's the fundamental problem. Making any sort of equivalencies between that and what the oppressing class is doing is dangerous. And it would be the same logic that would be used by the fucking crown in the 1770s as to why hey, our British soldiers are just, they're good people who are, if someone were to come along and say the British soldiers, it's not their fault that imperialism against the United States is happening. You can't be violent with them because they don't hate Americans. It's just the crown. Well, people would turn around and say, that's great. We don't want to have to. We don't want to have to, but a lot of them are abusing their power. A lot of them are abusing their power, upholding this systemic oppression where we are being taxed without any political representation. We have no rights. We are being treated like absolute dog shit, and we feel that as human beings we have a human right. It is a given part of being a human being that if we are going to be ruled by any sort of ruling class, that we have some sort of say in who makes up that ruling class. And the fact is that this has been going on long enough. The system is so deeply a part of what it is around us that we cannot even begin to think about what it would mean to try and remove ourselves from that system without violence. And thus the American Revolution happened. And we all, I think, maybe I'm wrong on this, I think most of us all, so far as I know, there aren't a whole ton of Americans looking back at the American Revolution and asking whether or not that was justified. We celebrate it. Freedom from our oppressors through violence.
They rise up and use violence to liberate themselves, then that is probably acceptable because they had material conditions in which they...
Like the Nazis?
Rising up against the Nazis was acceptable, yes.
No. After World War I, the Nazis claimed that Jewish bankers were holding the country down.
And that was false consciousness because that wasn't actually happening.
How can you tell?
That was false consciousness. Their ideology was not aligned with reality.
How can you tell?
Because Jews don't actually control banks in the world.
There was a disproportionate number of Jewish control of banks in Germany during the Weimar Republic.
All right, Vaush, we're done here. Thank you. Goodbye. This is, that's all I need to hear.
You don't have an ethical... Oh my God. I'd run too if I was him. In case anyone's curious about what's happening there, that guy was actually too stupid to have a conversation with.
Oh, Jesus Christ, why did I ever watch this? In response to Non-Compete's claim that no, the Jews did not control the banks.
Jews don't actually control banks in the world.
Vaush responds with, actually, yes, they did.
There was a disproportionate number of Jewish control of banks in Germany during the Weimar Republic.
All right, Vaush, we're done here.
He doubles down on this claim in a follow-up video days later by arguing that this is a statistically accurate reading of history.
The critical thing here is that for me saying that there was a disproportionate amount of Jewish control of the banks in the Weimar Republic, a bunch of people online are calling me a Nazi. Like everywhere, it's like a whole meme thing. And the weird thing is, as I understood when going into the debate and then have looked into and have found that yes, this is the case.
Here's my frustration. This is such a, it's like a whole nother fucking conversation. My frustration with Vaush on this one, right, is that like what in today's culture, what is the pinnacle of evil? What is like the go-to? Who is the go-to evil guy? Adolf Hitler. Who is the go-to evil ideology? Nazism, right? You understand the context of that conversation. You understand the context. And so to sit up there all like innocent, like, ooh, yeah, I'm just going to make a Nazi talking point without giving the proper framing that I am not saying, I want to be very clear, you have no choice. But when you bring up that point, but to include the framing that this is not a justification for Nazism, that this is not proof that there was some secret Jewish conspiracy, that this was some combination of like randomness and the nature of political, just the political, God, I'm not even going to try and get into this because I'm going to inevitably phrase something incorrectly in a way that will get me like hashtag canceled or whatever. But to sit up there all high and mighty like, we didn't have anything to do. Like, Vaush, you were clearly, based on the way you were phrasing that and going about that line of questioning, trying to get a strong reaction out of the guy. You could have brought up the point you were trying to make in a much less combative and a much less clippable way. But that was like that is fucking performative entertainment. Let me try and be edgy, but like prove to you that I'm not being edgy because I've got facts on my side. It's just
you don't have an ethical. Oh my God.
But because even engaging with this claim that Jews controlled the banks at any level of historical specificity cedes the entire argument to the fascists. Whether they did or not should be irrelevant. The real
but then you argue that. You don't have to see that, dude. If you
you
come out of the non-compete Vaush arguments thinking that non-compete looked good there, I think you probably are. You need to check your political bias or something. I don't know. That just seems a little.
I don't know, man. I do see what Destiny's saying. Like, you could just stand up there and be like, "No, Vaush, you're being a fucking idiot." But to say that non-compete looked really bad for like, dude, if someone wants to go down that rabbit hole of talking about that kind of that topic, and they make a claim which has undoubtedly been used by Nazis and Nazi sympathizers, it's clear that Vaush was using it to make an argument against Nazism. If you really pay attention to the broader context, follow up on what he was trying to say, very clearly he was trying to make an argument against Nazism. But in order to do so, he was phrasing an argument in such a way that Nazis commonly phrase it. And sort of the goal there, right, is to show that they're contradicting themselves, that they're not making good arguments. But to get really mad at someone for backing out when someone uses that kind of phrasing, that kind of terminology it's fair, man. Dude, like, what's the fucking fastest way to for these people who care so much about like deplatforming or whatever, and trying to like distance yourselves from things which might like remove the capacity for you to do your job, like to get man, like it's.
But I mean, you're about to contend with it now, I imagine, right? But the thing is that like even Vaush would agree with this. Like they act like it's some big like, oh well, Vaush. Like they would say like, Vaush. Do you think that just because the Jewish people might have had more representation and high financial positions means that the Holocaust was justified? Now, I'm not Vaush, but I feel like Vaush would probably say, well, no, of course not. But maybe he would. Maybe Vaush would say the Holocaust should have happened. Who knows? But no. Oh, I'm fucking dead. He's got a Tommy. Fuck, I'm so good! Oh, fuck. Hold on, I'm so sorry.
I do respect the fact that Destiny can game whilst doing this. I could never in a billion years.
The question is, why would this matter?
I'm
dropping a quick tactical Zizek nuke here because it's relevant regarding the topic of debates with racists and fascists.
Why is this false? Because the Nazis here, even if it were to be true, but it wasn't, of course, they lied in the guise of truth.
Okay,
because
so
the true question...
Something I've noticed, and I might be crazy. I think that that Zizek is easier to understand when you speed him up. Like, this might sound crazy, but let's play this at normal speed, and I'm going to do it at 1.5.
Fuck me, dude. I didn't get any of the bullets. God damn it. I dumpster that dude, though.
The real question is, why would this matter? I'm dropping a quick tactical Zizek nuke here because it's relevant regarding the topic of debates with racists and fascists.
Why is this false? Because the Nazis here, even if it were to be true, but it wasn't, of course, they lied in the guise of truth. Because the true question is not, is it true what they are claiming about the Jews? The true question is why, in order to sustain their politics, they need this fantasy of the Jew. Why they need this phantasmatic figure of the Jew. And incidentally, it's the same, I think, even today with Iraq. Here I think that many fake leftists fell into the trap of accepting the terms of the debate. The true question is not, is it true what they claim about Saddam? The true question is a totally different one, is what kind of new logic of hegemony, new world order is established in this way and so on and so on. Even to accept these terms and then to argue, you put yourself into a totally idiotic position, you know. When there you have to argue, oh, but it's not so bad, some people nonetheless supported Saddam. That's not our debate, my God.
No, I don't think Vaush is an anti-Semite, but I wouldn't be terribly upset at anyone who got this impression after seeing Vaush uncritically repeat this false Nazi talking point. And
pause you. Now when I play this at 1.5, I swear to God it gets easier to understand.
Dropping a quick tactical Zizek nuke here because it's relevant regarding the topic of debates with racists and fascists.
Why is this false? Because the Nazis here, even if it were to be true, but it wasn't, of course, they lied in the guise of truth. Because the true question is not, is it true what they are claiming about the Jews? The true question is why, in order to sustain their politics,
am I crazy?
They need this
I feel like it definitely gets easier to understand.
Why they need this figure of the Jew? And incidentally, it's the same, I think, even today with Iraq. Here I think that many fake leftists fell into the trap of accepting the terms of the debate. The true question is not, is it true what they claim about Saddam? The true question is a totally different one, is what kind of new logic of hegemony, new world order is established in this way and so on and so on. Even to accept these terms and then to argue, you put yourself into a totally idiotic position, you know. When there you have to argue, oh, but it's not so bad, some people nonetheless supported Saddam. That's not our debate, my God.
No, I don't think Vaush is an anti-Semite, but I wouldn't be terribly upset at anyone who got this impression after seeing Vaush uncritically repeat this false Nazi talking point. And
what? Dude, I have to go back and listen. I can't understand what Zizek says. I actually get triggered listening to him. Call me ableist. I super don't. It's really, really hard to understand what he's saying. Sorry. Or maybe I just can't hear well.
We're not going to do this a third time.
Because
the debate, arguing that yes, actually the Jews did control the banks before the Holocaust because my favorite streamer said so. It's these sorts of nonsense magic fairy tale wonderland hypotheticals that have no use outside of the performance.
So there's I said I'm not going to comment on this, and I am, because I should just never make the claim. I'm not going to comment on something because I can't stop myself. There's a difference, right, between Jews disproportionately were involved in the higher-ups of the banks, were disproportionately bankers, and Jews controlled the banks. Those are you're saying two different things. And
debate context to end up leaving a lasting impression on the internet. These little Vaush freaks flocked to non-compete to call him technically pro-Nazi when their streamer was the one spread.
So I think I think that's the point that Vaush was making, right? And that's where non-compete dipped out. And I just wish that Vaush had just phrased it like that instead of trying to like be
Nazi misinformation. Part of my issue with debate streams is that misinformation.
Okay, wait, let's just look this up.
We don't need to wait for Steve.
Because I'd always heard this to be true a lot. Is this just not true?
Weeks of work to make. They stream for 8 hours a day and say shit like this, completely ignoring the real-world complexities of these issues and reducing them to fun little rhetorical games to be used for dunking on other YouTubers.
That guy was actually too stupid to have a conversation with.
Then all their fans start spreading the shit around the internet uncritically and wonder why people call them Nazis.
A bunch of people online are calling me a Nazi. There was a disproportionate number of Jewish control of banks in Germany during the Weimar Republic. This is really weird to me.
Like the way he phrases it is so clearly trying to be Mr. Edge
because of a number of older clips from his stream where he brings up things like chimichangas and Pedialyte, not unlike the examples we just looked at. Now, Gary, I need you, man.
Hey.
So straight up, these clips are weird as fuck. So fucking weird. Weird and wrong as arguments. I'm not going to play them because I am hanging on to a single shred of hope that this video will still be able to get monetized. It probably won't though. But, Gary?
Well, despite Noah's objections to these clips and their apparent sussiness, there isn't anything in them that would merit the claim that Vaush is a
Pedialyte drinker.
That is a very serious accusation to be making, and to make it without solid proof is dangerous, and we should not normalize doing that.
Thanks, man.
Okay.
So at some point in time, Vaush stopped using these extreme examples involving children in hypotheticals, probably because using them only encouraged people to make these spurious but not out of nowhere accusations against him. So if he understands that handling these sensitive topics carelessly can have negative consequences and has adjusted his behavior accordingly in the past when they've affected him, why can't he do the same for others? As we've seen, the effects are real. Professor Flowers is the target of a harassment campaign spurred on by Vaush with his use of this hypothetical about the fear of retribution. Non-compete was accused of technically defending Nazism because Vaush, through his little rhetorical game, justified this treatment in their eyes. He is either choosing to ignore these facts or just doesn't care, and both of these should be unacceptable. There's a great thread from a streamer called Ask Vera that runs through the standard procedure of interactions with debate streamers and how they are a recurring problem. Number 4 is especially relevant here. Reactionary debaters smuggle assumptions into hypotheticals, hoping you get distracted with the hypothetical rather than challenge the assumption. This is precisely what happened to Professor Flower.
What? Okay, this is then. Oh, this is so boring. This guy would never talk to me. If you can't engage with a hypothetical, then either study up, I guess, or like practice working within other frameworks, or like extracting these like generalized forms of ideas or arguments. Like I work with it, practice it. Anybody can do it. They're not out of reach for most people, right? Assuming you don't have some type of mental disability or brain injury or whatever. Most people can understand a hypothetical, understand them, and then or because hypotheticals shit can get tricky, especially in the middle. Any debate can be tricky. Just say like, oh, like I don't do debates. Like it's not my forte. It's fine to say that too. You can just say like, oh, like I just do video essays. That's fine as well. This thing where it's like, well, he's a hypothetical. It's not fair. He smuggled in a bad assumption. That's part of a hypothetical. If somebody smuggles in an assumption, or if somebody makes an assumption that you think is not fair in a hypothetical. For instance, let's say yesterday a mom was driving and her car got hit by a drunk driver, and I think that was I think that was mom's fault. And it's like, wait, why the fuck was it mom's fault if a drunk driver hit her? Well, if mom was out drinking and driving and she got into an accident, you said that's her fault, right? And it's like, yeah, but that's not the same thing, right? You're smuggling in an assumption that drunk driving and being hit by a drunk driver are comparable when they're not analogous, because one shows a personal failing of the mother to do something. She was being immoral by drinking and driving. The other shows the fault of another agent, right? They're two different things. They're disanalogous. You can argue against a hypothetical. You don't have to automatically assume that a hypothetical is correct. Like that's part of a discussion.
Regarding the topic of genocide, and this distraction has forced her onto her back foot ever since. Here she is talking about it in her final video on the topic.
So there are a lot of people who are saying that I'm genocidal, and I just want to clear up what I mean. What I mean to say is that there is no amount of violence that...
Well, shit's about to get crazy. All right, I'm going to stop here, and we're going to finish this shit eventually.